Buongiorno, my friends and colleagues. There'll be an edition of the Comedy of Errors, an Oxfordian edition coming soon. And I know, as Dionne Warwick sang so eloquently, promises, promises. And I've been saying that for a while, but it's true. And in the meantime, while that's being prepared, I was working on Much Ado, and I'm pretty far along on an Oxfordian edition of this play, too. I motivated myself by choosing a topic for this conference. And want to talk about slander today in this play, especially. I do like the Branagh version where when the title comes up, Much Ado About Nothing, everybody cheers. Hooray for nothing. All right, about nothing. Oxford loves this term because it means so many things, paradoxically. Represented by the O that he likes because of his title. And he plays with this quite a bit. You can think of passages in King Lear and elsewhere. Then there's the bawdy O, best represented in this exchange in Hamlet. I think nothing, my lord. That's a fair thought to lie between maids' legs. What is, my lord? Nothing. And if you need that explained, it's not going to be me. We are told that the Elizabethan pronunciation of nothing had a harder T sound to it, so it would be almost indistinguishable from noting. Noting, that is, taking notice of something specifically. And Oxford plays with this in the play. Benedict is anxious about opinions concerning Hero, and Benedict says, I noted her not, but I looked on her. So there is a difference of paying closer attention in this note pun. And then there is the literal taking notes, that is, writing things down. Dogberry is anxious that everything gets written down, and he's scurrying back and forth, making sure the sexton takes this down and this down. And his problem in the end of the play is that the sexton took off before that criminal called Dogberry an ass. And so he has to go through the rest of the play reminding everybody, don't forget, I'm an ass. And what he means is that even though it wasn't written down, you have to remember this because it was, as bad a crime as anything else, being called an ass. Having things written down is important. And then there's another meaning for noting, and that is putting text to notes, composing, creating music. And that becomes a component in the play also. But the real launch here is from that incident in Christmas time at 1580, where Oxford, having kind of joined a Catholic-like alliance with his cousin Henry Howard and two others, realized that it wasn't just about enthusiasm for Italy and culture and art and all the rest, that they were serious about the politics and assassination attempts and all the rest. So he broke with them. He confessed to Elizabeth that he was leaning that way, but not when it came to assassinating her and putting a Catholic on the throne. So they came back at him with accusations, everything they could drum up desperately under the sun. And Elizabeth, typically equivocal and dithering, seems like she didn't know what to do, and everybody's under house arrest for a while, but it sure does seem like she trusted Oxford a bit more. And, he's pretty soon at tournaments winning prizes very quickly after this. But the evil faction of Henry Howard, Oxford's cousin, Charles Arendelle, and John Southwell, created these libels, and they're just tons of these things, libels against Oxford and all of his crimes, which Percy Allen a long time ago called a series of charges so wildly exaggerated and so patently absurd that they almost carried their own reputation with them. Unfortunately, they smeared Oxford kind of forever in some regards. Now, in the play, the climax is even got its own name, the shaming scene. And what Claudio does to Hero is called Slander by Beatrice again and again. It's just slander and rancor and accusation. Sweet hero, she is wronged. She is slandered. Antonio, the uncle. God knows I loved my niece and she is dead, slandered to death by villains, if that's even possible. But altogether, slander or slanders occurs a lot of times in this play. So it is a big concern on Oxford's mind whenever he wrote or rewrote this one. Here is one of the many indexes that you get from the Howard Arendelle libels. Now, they're sometimes just called the Arendelle libels because he seems to have been in charge, but it sure looks to me like Howard is saying, here, write this, write this, write this. Arendelle does it dutifully, and then Arendelle puts out that stuff, and Howard says, yes, I can confirm that this is absolutely true, what he wrote, what he plagiarized from me, or whatever. But anyway, Oxford's terrible. He's got atheism, and why are the numbers coming after the ordinary use to lie for the whetstone in the worst degree, mercenary faith, butchery, bloodiness, dangerous practice. Ooh, he's playing tritones on the oboe. What is that supposed to mean? A notable dishonesty of life, and I can't even name it. It's so horrible. He's a pervert. Drunkenness. He has a particular grudge to us all three. Yeah, well, so do I now too. And undutiful, dealing to the queen. Uh-oh, wait a minute. That's a little bit more serious. Margot Anderson has said that Arendelle used conflicting numbering systems to enumerate De Vere's vices. And Percy Allen said that the libels show a striking contrast between the mathematically correct sequence of the numbered sections, fourthly, fifthly, sixthly, and the jumbled incoherence of Arendelle's replies under each number, a contrast which has not escaped Oxford's searching eye as he awaits every opportunity to win more laughs from his opponent's muddled mind. And I think part of the bungling is because they are so desperate and frightened for their lives that they come up with crazy stuff and then try to make it really complex or somehow. So this is mocked in the play by Dogberry. And I initially thought, all right, Dogberry is given to malapropism, using the wrong words, overreaching in vocabulary. And I thought this might have been one that one of the Arendelle accusations is, first, I will detect him of the most impudent and senseless lies that ever passed the mouth of any man. Detect him? However, I'm wrong and willing to admit it, because one of my reading groups was on to Measure for Measure. And that use of the word detect is, in fact, appropriate here. I will discover of him or uncover him to be the most, something like that. However, more importantly, this is the big moment where Dogberry gets some laughs, where he's explaining why these guys are arrested. Marry, sir, he says to Leonato, they have committed false report. Moreover, they have spoken untruths. Secondarily, they are slanders, he says. Sixth and lastly, they have belied a lady. Thirdly, they have verified unjust things. And to conclude, they are lying knaves. Now, the bungling of the numbers is so obvious that I think I usually miss, most people probably miss the fact that every one of those accusations is exactly the same. And this is what Arendelle does. He just keeps repeating the same stuff, hoping that, I don't know, it's going to sound different with different vocabulary. But the fact that they committed false report, they spoke untruths. Okay, so they're liars, they're slanderers, and so they're liars. They belied a lady, so they're liars. They have verified unjust things, so that's like confirming their lies. And finally, they're liars. All right, well done. Too cunning to be understood, too. So here you got the villains in the play, Don John, Conrad, and Borachio. I'd say, and others have before me, that we've got Henry Howard, Charles Arendelle, and Francis Southall in these villains. And first, Henry Howard, a cousin of Oxford's, who Oxford ended up saying that he was part of the Howards, the most treacherous race under the heaven, and my Lord Henry Howard, the worst villain that lived in this earth. All right, well, but that's Oxford. Here's somebody else, independent testimony, saying that Howard No man was more fitted for conspiracy, no man so venomous against those he hated, or so obsequious to those he hoped to make his friends. His mind, remarkable for its great learning, was so perverted that in a bawdy and outspoken age, he wrapped up his filthy imputations in Latin and ascribed them to ancient authors. Not only was he impure in thought and deed, but he lacked a grain of loving kindness, of nobility of mind, or generosity of heart. Few men have been so purposelessly bent upon destroying the fellowship of man. Now, this is the biographer of Robert Cecil. And if you find Robert Cecil to be a valid subject for a biography and you say this about somebody else, whoa, then I'm going with Oxford on saying this is the worst villain ever lived on earth. And there have been some others. Percy Allen and Eva Turner Clark thought that maybe Conrad is a rough anagram for C. Arendelle, Charles Arendelle. I don't know, maybe. And Borachio, his name is associated with being drunk, but the elder Ogburns thought that it also may be saying broach, E.O., Earl of Oxford, and broach does mean to stab, as in Much Ado About, or Midsummer Night's Dream. Borachio says that his job is chiefly to confirm any slander that Don John had made. Now, it's right around the same time, but not those three. Yeah, Oxford is always concerned about his reputation, and has been hypersensitive about it since he was young, as we know from the E.O. poems. So there's other accusations addressed in Much Ado, it seems to me. Gabriel Harvey said, no words but valorous, no works but womanish only. And when we first hear about Benedick, Oxford's stand-in in the play, and when we first hear from Beatrice, the very first line is, she interrupts a conversation about the war. I pray you, is Signor Montalto returned from the wars or no? The messenger says, I don't know what you're talking about, lady. Her own uncle says, what? Who are you talking about, niece? And it is for her closest confidant and cousin, Harrow, to explain she means Signor Benedick. So what's interesting here is that no one knows what she's talking about, except the riverside. Montanto, from Italian montanto, a fencing term meaning an upward blow or thrust. Oh, okay, thanks, scholarship. Well, I'm not bothered that nobody in the play even knows what she's talking about, because it seems like we have the situation here that we do with Katerina at the beginning of Taming of the Shrew, where she's shrieking, she's yelling, and she has every right to. Good God, with her horrible father and her situation and everybody dismissing her, but nobody listens to her because she is so consumed with anger. Beatrice here, way more articulate, way more clever, but she also is wrapped up in her animosity against Benedick. And so, you know, her in-jokes are just for one. Nobody else gets what she's talking about. And that is no explanation there, Riverside. Isaac Asimov attempted a little bit more, and he says confidently that it's a fencing thrust. The implication is that the gentleman in question is a great swashbuckler, presumably a phony whose valor is all talk. But I can't confirm that. So maybe just has to remain an in-joke. But certainly the intent is clear. Beatrice is insulting Benedick any way she can, and continues to do so throughout that scene. All right, closer to the accusations of the treacherous three, Howard wrote to Walsingham in 1580, touching mine accuser, if the botches and deformities of his misshapen life suffice not to discredit the warrant of his wreckful word, yet, and he writes to Elizabeth, although this course of casting open other men's deformities, most gracious and most redoubted sovereign, repugn so much against my nature, as I rather would endure the smart of trouble than be noted for an instrument of other men's calamity. Yet, what a weasel. And he also uses the word noted. Yeah, when we're gonna. So the deformities of this misshapen life. There's this puzzle that, and this is always left out of performances. Borachio is talking to Conrad after their deception in front of Claudio that night. And they're talking about fashion. Two thugs talking about haute couture. So that's another issue. But seest not what a deformed thief this fashion is, says Borachio. The watch, literal minded, bungle this too and take deformed as a person. I know that deformed. He's been a vile thief this 7 years. He goes up and down like a gentleman. And they report eventually to Dogberry, who also just assumes that there is this person walking around called deformed. The watch heard them talk of one deformed. They say he wears a key in his ear and a lock hanging by it. What does any of this mean? And how could you make this kind of mistake? Well, if we don't dismiss it, deformed wears a lock. And most notes will say, oh, does that mean a love lock? Like this fetching gentleman has. Hubba hubba. Or say the elder Ogburns is the lock on Oxford himself regarding his role, his identity, and that constant concern about being tongue-tied by authority. Well, okay, maybe. What about that other bit, the key in his ear? And I wonder, okay, what could that possibly mean? A key to unlock, and if it's in his ear, so he has heard enough to know the truth? That's speculation, but I'm not hearing anything else. All right, Dogberry's given, as I said, to malapropism, as in this case, our watch, sir, have indeed comprehended two auspicious persons. Anybody who's watched a courtroom drama of any sort knows the language of the court. I object, Your Honor, on grounds of hearsay and blah, blah, blah. Well, here it's clearly, I have indeed apprehended two suspicious persons, but Dogberry bungles it. So I wonder, hey, is deformed also a malapropism on the part of the watch and Dogberry? Then they intend actually to be defamed. So Oxford's getting that in there for himself being defamed, as others have been. Gabriel Harvey, again, is describing Oxford, and he's outside the evil three, but it's right around the same time period where Oxford's called a passing singular odd man. And Harvey focuses on his foppishness being the most characteristic trait of him, especially that Italian style that he adopts, that fashion. The word fashion occurs even more than slander in this play, and in a number of guises, as it were. Again, in this weird conversation about fashion that night of the deception, Conrad says to Borachio, I see that the fashion wears out more apparel than the man, but art thou not thyself giddy? Keep that word in mind. Giddy with the fashion too, that thou hast shifted out of thy tale into telling me of the fashion. And then there's extraneous fashion phrase here when the ladies are having a discussion about what Hera's going to wear before the first attempt at a wedding. Margaret says, I saw the Duchess of Milan's gown that they praise so. Kevin Gilberry has assured us there was no real-life Duchess of Milan, so what's going on there? One of the accusations against Oxford was that he had said that the cobblers' wives of Milan are more richly dressed every working day than the Queen on Christmas Day. Okay, so this is bad news. Yeah, sacrificing babies and worshiping Satan and being murderous and all that, but insulting what the Queen wears? Now I'm paying attention to these libels. Arendelle portrays Oxford at table as a garrulous inebriate. Alan Nelson is glad to report. The second vice wherewith I mean to touch him is that he is a most notorious drunkard and very seldom sober. Well, we already have Borachio to take care of this accusation. But more, in his drunken fits, he is no man, but a beast dispossessed of all temperance, modesty, and reason. He's called a monster. Alan Nelson is glad to report. And that term beastliness or beast are used against Oxford several times in all these libels. And there are several instances in the play where beastliness or kind of monstrosities are alluded to. Claudio, in goading Benedick about his paranoia concerning women, infidelity, cuckoldry, says, "Fear not, man, we'll tip thy horns with gold, and all Europa shall rejoice at thee, as once Europa did at lusty Jove when he would play the noble beast in love." There's that line, "In time the savage bull doth bear the yoke," meaning, yeah, you say that now, Benedick, but eventually you'll subject yourself to marriage, and you'll be a tamed animal. But one of the accusations that Alan Nelson is glad to report is that Arendelle says he would often tell my Lord Harry, myself, and Southwell that he had abused a mare. Horses show up in a lot of plays, but I don't know if there's maybe a special attention to Benedick referring to his horse and comparing it to the speed of Beatrice's tongue. But anyway, yeah, I'm done arguing. And Beatrice mumbles, "You always end with a jade's trick. I know you of old." But as I say, that it's included, and Oxford's being pretty thorough in these accusations. He's also accused of pederasty, and his victims were countless. Nelson is happy to insist. He supposedly said, from Arendelle and the libels, that when women were unsweet, fine young boys were in season. It's a small matter, really, but there's one moment in the play when there is a boy, and it's at the beginning of the scene where Benedick is going to overhear these guys insisting that Beatrice is in love with him. At the beginning, he says, "In my chamber window lies a book. Bring it hither to me in the orchard." The boy says, "I'm here already, sir." And Benedick says, "Yeah, I know that, but I would have thee hence." So the one point where there's a boy around, Benedick wants him away rather than anything else. Now, as for Claudio, the first thing that occurs to one Oxfordian or more is that he seems to be a representation of Oxford in his role in distrusting his wife. So the plot is very much like Othello, except it turns out to be comedy instead of horrible tragedy. And the distrust in the fidelity of wives is thematic throughout the canon, right? So partly, maybe, Claudio is Oxford. But also think that we're thinking in terms of Sir Philip Sidney here. Now, I have no respect for this guy anymore, and I just call him Flippy Sidney. But there are a number of instances where there would be rivalry between the two, and the famous tennis court incident is one, resulting in Flippy deciding he's going to challenge Oxford to a duel before Elizabeth said, "Knock it off." Flippy was the so disrespectful. Flippy was the choice of Burleigh for his daughter Anne until he raised his sights higher onto Oxford. And who knows what else. But in a certain respect, there is especially a animosity justified here, where the E.O. poem, "Were I a king, I might command content," this early Oxford poem, wonders, what if I were a king? What if I were obscure? What if I were dead? A doubtful choice of these things which to crave, a kingdom or a cottage or a grave. So Flippy comes back with this poem, because he's a plagiarist and he steals everybody else's stuff, and says, "An easy choice of these which to crave, no kingdom nor a cottage but a grave," basically saying, yeah, I wish you were dead. Smack this guy. Well, he does, as Sir Andrew in Twelfth Night. and to a certain extent in this play. So Arendelle claimed that Oxford was to have Sidney murdered in his lodging. And then, of course, Howard comes in and says, yeah, that's true. That's so true. Mr. Philip Sidney, proffering his person to the combat like a gallant gentleman, had notwithstanding been most beastly murdered by 12 calivers in his bed at Greenwich, if Oxford had his way. But in the play, though the duel is supposedly going to take place for Claudio's horrendous behavior, in the end, when everything's resolved, Benedict says, "For thy part, Claudio, I did think to have beaten thee, but come, we are friends." So to whatever extent the rivalry and animosity between Sidney and Oxford may have flourished at a time, and maybe only because after Sidney's dead, it's kind of, past its relevance. But in any case, that's resolved too. So time and again, Oxford is addressing these libels and overturning them or mocking them or saying, this is much ado about nothing. And here, as some of you know, is my favorite. Arendelle claims that in railing of all estates he overruns him, sparing no woman, be she never so virtuous, nor any man, be he never so honorable, and this beast being never restrained from this liberty of railing, beastly drunkenness, this monster, and railing, never letting up from railing. It's not a crime, but it certainly is Oxfordian and Shakespearean. So in play after play, railing, Timon of Athens, King Lear, and Twelfth Night is a case where Feste the fool doesn't rail. Yet Elizabeth says there is no slander in an allowed fool, though he do nothing but rail. Okay, but again, he doesn't rail. But Oxford so inhabits these characters that he assumes that they all have his traits, even if they're not going to be displayed in the course of the play. His continual railing, my lord and Arendelle, the guy's railing, never lets up. His continual railing of my lord, for putting his trust in the queen. Now it's personal again. Oxford said, when the queen said he was a bastard, for which cause he would never love her and leave her in the lurch one day. Reports Arendelle to the queen. Oxford daily railing of the queen. I heard it, says Arendelle, but he was in his cups because he's always drunk. Well, that almost gets him off the hook. His continual railing against her majesty. He was railing at Francis Southwell for commending the queen's singing voice one night. Now it's getting specific again. He was railing at Francis Southwell for commending the queen's singing one night at Hampton Court, protesting by the blood of God that she had the worst voice and did everything with the worst grace that any ever woman did, and that he was never nonplussed, at a loss for words. But when he was trying to speak well of her and just, well, we addressed this in the play too. All that attention to the song and the voice between Don Pedro and Balthazar. Men are deceivers ever. No, you're fine. You sing well enough for a shift, for a time, for the moment. The Ogburns wondered, for a shift. Well, is that the clothing thing again, associated with a female? You sing well enough for a woman? And kind of like trying to defuse that accusation too. Well, things get resolved. She died, my lord, but whiles her slander lived. And we can think about posterity, I guess, now. Benedict, in interrupting a course of conversation concerning love between himself and Beatrice near the end of the play, Act 5, says that it's no crime to out your own horn, that therefore it is most expedient for the wise, if Don worm his conscience find no impediment to the contrary, to be trumpet of his own virtues. In other words, you got to stick up for yourself. But as has been pointed out, Don Worm capitalized there. It looks like, it sounds like, it feels like that's a common trope, that, a little worm of conscience. Yeah, okay. But if that was a common notion, then why do we have to translate it in parentheses, his conscience? You don't. Don equals count. There's Don John, sometimes called Count John, in this play. Count, as we know, is Earl. It's the Count and Countess on the continent. It's the Earl and Countess in England. And we know that the worm is that Romance language root word for Earl of Lear. So it's another case where it looks like Oxford's desperate to know that his name is going to be buried, but let's try to get that in there in a statement about being remembered for the right things rather than what you've been libeled for with your sullied reputation. The Howard Arendelle libels dismiss all accusations of Oxford against them as the emanations of a giddy brain. So when he came back at them, they're defending themselves as emanations of a giddy brain which must dissolve to nothing now. I told you, remember that word giddy and dissolve to nothing now. They weighed in with such slanders as would have brought Oxford to instant and permanent destruction had a tenth part of them been true, asserts Charlton Ogburn. And I've always been just struck by this line. It really gets to me at the end, and it doesn't even mean anything. Never flout at me, because everybody's going to tease Benedict now that he's succumbed to love. For man is a giddy thing, and this is my conclusion. So the accusation is he's got a giddy brain, but he takes that word and turns it upside down. Now let's get back to notes. At the very end, even though Dogberry's the goofy one, there's this insistence that, well, for some reason, maybe it's because they're in public again, they have to keep up their appearances and their personas. They say, no, I'm not really in love with you, and that's just been reported. But Claudio trots out a sonnet that Benedict apparently wrote. I'll be sworn upon it that he does love her, for here's a paper written in his own hand. And then Harrow says, and here's another written my cousin's hand. So they have to face the fact that this is written down, therefore it's real. Yay. But we're not quite done. A messenger near the end of the play comes and talks to Don Pedro and the rest, saying, my lord, your brother John is taken in flight and brought with armed men back to Messina. Benedict's response, dismissive. Think not on him till tomorrow. I'll devise the brave punishments for him. So let me understand this. We're going to dance. We're going to have a double marriage. We're going to have a wedding feast. And then it's the wedding night, and he's going to spend it thinking up horrible punishments. Damn, I love this play. And what are these punishments? Well, the elder Ogburn said, this play, this is what did it. This is the vengeance against the slanderers. And as for Henry Howard, who knows who Henry Howard is? Unless you're an expert in Jacobean court history or you're an Oxfordian, then Henry Howard weaseled around, got in the good graces of Robert Cecil later on, but what did he amount to? And by the way, that goes for Alan Nelson too. Henry Howard, Alan Nelson, you burnt. All right. Except I want to thank Bonner Cutting for this extra little gimmick here. One more thing. The real last line after Benedict said that about brave punishments is strike up pipers. So the final thing we get in this play our notes. And the rest is silence. All right. Too good a time. Since I'm not there, I can't talk to you all and have you buy me drinks. But if you want to follow up in some way, there's my email address. And some people are still hooked on my old website through the university, which I have not been able to touch or tear down in years with old titles and mistakes. And so here's the website I use now. And Jennifer Newton designed it, and I update it. So there we go. Thanks for this, and enjoy the rest of the conference.